If you saw my introductory video, you should be already familiar with this clip. This is where I experienced choking for the first time during my local climbing competition. At the start of this route, I didn't believe that I could pull on such a small crimp, and so I looked for other solutions and other alternatives that in the end didn't work. In the scientific literature, choking is defined as a decrease in performance when under pressure. That is, under any factor or combination of factors that increase the importance of performing well. This definition alone shows how broadly this concept can be applied far from the competition setting alone. Many are the studies that have been conducted on this topic. Even though we're far from completely understanding this phenomenon, there are some solid information, solid insights that studies have shown and that we can employ to improve our capabilities of performing under pressure. There is strong evidence that anxiety is directly or indirectly mediating this effect. But how? We know in psychology that anxiety has an inverted U-shape relationship with performance. Lack of anxiety, which is this cognitive and emotional activation related to unknown future events, impairs performance as much as too much anxiety. This is actually showing that anxiety is a strategy that we use to mobilize our resources and to perform, to do our tasks. Obviously, this happens when it's within the optimal range. In fact, we know that there are some people who experience clutch, which is the increase of performance when under pressure.
I love you.
It's easy to understand why lack of anxiety can hinder performance. We lack the motivational resources to initiate or to maintain the activity, which in the end impairs our performance. But why should too much anxiety impair performance? The attentional control theory sport, also known as ACTS, adapts the results from the original psychological theory, ACT, to the sport context. It was discovered that anxiety impairs our executive functions, which are a set of processes that control behavior. In particular, it was shown that it impairs our attentional capacities to monitor, shift attention, and inhibit stimuli, which are distracting us from the task. In other words, during sport practice, anxiety is impacting our information processing efficiency. In fact, some experiments shows that in experts, anxiety has a less disruptive effect than for novices. This is due to the amount of skills that in experts are automatized. So even though the efficiency of the information processing is impaired in experts, they have still more resources to employ and they can still manage this impact in a better way than novices. In fact, some other experiments shows that experts are better than novices in resisting and not getting distracted by both internal and external stimuli. This includes anxious somatic sensations such as increased heartbeat, sedation, or also disruptive thoughts. Vickers in 1996 discovered an important phenomenon in sports psychology called the quiet eye. Using eye tracking, they discovered that the duration of the fixation of a target predict the accuracy of the performance in a shooting task. In fact, it seems that the duration of the quiet eye, which is this fixation duration, is important in the programming and monitoring the motor skills. These experiments were also replicated in other sports, especially in basketball free throws, and has a very strong empirical basis. So it has been replicated many times. These insights have been used by Vine and colleagues in 2011 to do an intervention in which they were teaching the quiet eye, the theory and the application of it to basketball free throws, and to see if a training in the quiet eye could improve performance. Not only that, they also wanted to see if the training in the quiet eye could improve the performance, especially when under pressure. And so what they did was to give the participants some training phases, but the main element was the comparison between the experimental group, which received the quiet eye training, and the control group, which did not. The results of the experiments showed that the experimental group not only had longer quiet eye, but had an increased performance compared to the control group in the pressure phase. Interestingly, there were no difference in the levels of anxiety, perceived anxiety, in the two groups in the pressure phase. So even though both of the groups perceived anxiety, the subjects that were exposed and trained to the quiet eye performed better. What was the coaching that the experimental group received? Well, they received some 6 strategies coming from a video of Michael Jordan, in which he was showing techniques to have longer fixation duration, which was tested before in other experiments, and that can increase the capacity to control the motor performance. If you're interested in basketball, I recommend to go check the link in the description of the video to see what are these tips and techniques that are specific to the sport. I will present in future some more general rules that can be applied to more sports in general, and some that can be applied to climbing as well in future videos. So now we know that even if we're feeling anxious, there are some strategies that we can apply to buffer this pressure effect and still perform as best as we can. But what about strategies to decrease the perceived anxiety? Well, ACTS also has some answers for this question. Whether increased pressure leads towards higher levels of anxiety depends firstly on our cognitive biases, which makes us perceive differently the probabilities and the cost of the outcomes, and also on individual differences in the level of performance monitoring. Cognitive biases are systematic errors in thinking. For example, we have the tendency to focus our attention more on threatening stimuli and also to interpret neutral stimuli or ambiguous stimuli in a threatening way. For example, some studies on golfers showed that when they were close to a competition, they were much more likely to report stressors, so stressful situations, before the competition compared to when they weren't close to the competition. And this obviously adds up to the stress that they feel during the competition as well. Also, highly anxious people were shown to be performing more error monitoring during the performance, and this was shown to lead to increased pressure, increased anxiety, and a decreased performance as well. We're also pretty bad in judging whether an event is casual or not. So if we toss a coin multiple times, we will underestimate the probability of having tails, let's say, 6 times in a row. When this is applied to sport, this leads towards the hot hand bias or hot hand effect, which is when you have multiple successful attempts in a row. When it is applied to positive outcomes, this bias is actually functional because it increases self-confidence and will in fact increase performance. When it is concerning positive outcomes, this bias is actually functional because it's sustaining self-confidence. But on the other hand, when it's applied to negative outcomes, so when you're having multiple unfaithful attempts in a row, this can have profound impact on your self-confidence, your identity, and your motivation. Consider this. Walter Hagen, who is a highly successful golfer, knowing that he makes an average of 7 mistakes per round, declared, "When I make a bad shot, I don't worry about it. I figure it's just 1 out of the 7. This is a strategy that impacts the effect of the cognitive bias. How do we change our cognitive biases in our direction? There are multiple ways. Some are quicker. for example, psychoeducation, which is what I am doing at the moment. And some are less quick and require longer periods and longer training. And in this case, the techniques are mostly coming from cognitive behavioral therapy. If you want to know more about these, don't worry, I will talk in details about these in multiple future videos. So now we learned that when we're feeling pressure, we have two different ways to counteract the detrimental effects. And one is that we have strategies to decrease anxiety in the first place. And the second is that even if we're feeling anxious, we know that we can counteract these effects and still perform as good as we can. Does pressure impact your performance? Do you have specific strategies that you would like to share with us? Let me know in the comments. And in the meantime, I'll see you in the next videos and stay psyched.